Hi, this is John Rowell for the Rowell Report. Today is Tuesday, August 19th, 2025, and I'd like to present 6 points regarding the progress towards a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine after the big meetings in Alaska and the White House. So let's get right into it. By the way, welcome to all visitors and to all my subscribers. I hope you enjoy this video. Anyway, um, first, what are the Ukraine's demands and what is the progress towards what they have requested? Um, we have their demand for a complete withdrawal of Russian forces. Also, they want to establish a war crimes court to study the Russia war crimes and to gather information to prosecute Russian officials, military officers, etc. They're looking for a return of children taken from Ukraine at the start of the war. Some have reported that number up to 20,000 children. Um, Ukraine seeks full restoration of its territorial integrity. So basically, it wants to restore the uh, border with Russia that was in existence up until February 2022. So um, we also go in with the reparations from Russia. They're looking for about $1 trillion. So then the final point is the security guarantees. They're looking for security guarantees from NATO, and they want the United States to back up NATO with a full security guarantee. So let's look at the progress and how that's going. So the first point is um, Russia is advancing towards Kiev, and they're entering key eastern Ukrainian cities like Pokrovsk, like Konstantinovka. Um, they've surrounding other key cities on at least two or three sides. So this is definitely not going in the direction that they were looking for. Russia is disputing the claim of the so-called 20,000 kidnapped children from Ukraine. Russia received a list from Ukraine at one of the Istanbul meetings and believes that the number of children who went to Russia by mistake could be around 3 dozen or so. Also, we can ask what neutral country or organization would be in charge of a war crimes court, and would Ukraine war crimes be included? So, also, um, what kind of mechanism would be in place to study the reparations for Ukraine? And would this include reparations to Russia, like the Nord Stream 2 that was seemingly blown up by um, NATO countries? And finally, the security guarantees, which seems like it's the easiest question to resolve of all of them. So, anyway, but none of these points is Ukraine doing well. In fact, things are going definitely in the wrong direction. Um, Now let's take a look at Russia's demands and progress. How's it going for them? Russia demands Ukraine neutrality and non alignment. Some countries have agreed that this is a good point. This is still in dispute. Uh, the legalization of annexed territory in Ukraine, which is Crimea and the four oblasts, this is seemingly a point where there could be some possible dialogue with many countries, but until the United States accepts that, it doesn't seem like it would advance in an international forum. Also, Russia seeks the demilitarization of Ukraine and the denazification of Ukraine. So you say, well, there's no Nazis in Ukraine. Well, check again. There's Nazi symbols, there's Nazi flags, there's Nazi salutes. There's, all sorts of evidence that neo-Nazi spirit is still alive and well in Ukraine. Also, they're looking for protection of Russian language and rights in Ukraine, especially the rights of the Russian Orthodox Church, which was suppressed. And how's it going for Russia with all these demands? Ukraine is running out of soldiers, weapons, and funds. Russia could certainly get Ukraine's neutrality if they win the war. Well, that's pretty obvious, but it seems like they're much closer to getting that demand realized than Ukraine is in any of their demands. Um, Russia has taken Crimea in 2014. President Obama said boo, or didn't even say boo, and he seemed to be okay with that. The four oblasts are almost completely under Russian control, so it may be de facto, although not de jure. So we'll see how that goes. Um, Also, a regulation of troop size and investigation into the neo-Nazi activities. That should be very easy in a post-war scenario. So um, many are still discussing about the possible troop size for Ukraine in case they were to lose the war. And that certainly is a point that could be resolved once the war ends. Um, and the protection of languages and cultures is a human right. So that should be an easy thing to resolve as well. It's enshrined in many documents. So why Ukraine continues to persecute those who speak Russian or the Russian culture or the Russian Orthodox Church is a mystery. So anyway, the third point that I see from all these meetings is that dead empires don't speak, they only listen. If you take the largest planetary empires in the last 200 years, many of them were represented by their leaders in the meeting with President Trump. We have Germany, who has 0% of its empire left, and its economy is clearly in decline. Germany still has 40 U.S. bases and about 40,000 U.S. soldiers stationed in Germany. Some say that's for the protection of NATO countries, or is it really to maintain the United States' control over Germany? I would say it's the latter. They don't really need those soldiers in Germany. Germany was a conquered country, and it still seems like they're still trying to drive that home with the number of bases and soldiers in Germany. They could easily put those in another country, and but anyway, um, we look at another country, Italy. Italy has 0% of its empire left. Um, and the U.S. military has substantial footprint and power in Italy. I remember uh, the U.S. airplane that was flying extremely low in the north of Italy and hit a cable. There was a cable car with people inside. The people fell, and many were killed. And the pilot was arrested, but then I think he was pardoned and he left the country, basically um, never giving any justice to the families of those who were deceased um, in that Top Gun style flight that implicated the death of Italians. So it's very clear that the United States has a huge power in Italy, and Italy is still a critical hub for the Army, the Navy, the Air Force. We have the Navy base by Naples, Italy. So we know that the Air Force is in the north, the Navy is in the south, the Army's in Italy, and it used to be an empire. Now it's just another conquered country. It was one of the Axis powers during World War II, led by Benito Mussolini, and their leader also is um, has been very um, docile and condescending to President Trump. So that's another point. Um, the UK has basically 5% of what was the British Empire at its peak, and has lost 70% of the income that was generated during the peak of its empire. So, um, also, the US has returned nuclear weapons to Europe using the UK, the US air bases in the UK, um, to have those bombs placed. Well, let's just say that there is a deep crisis in Europe, and Russia says, well, we don't like those nuclear bombs there. We'll hit those bases. Um, so the UK people, I doubt they're really in favor of having those bombs there, but it's another dead empire that is, I think the 22% of the exports of the UK go to the USA. The UK is becoming more and more dependent on the United States for its economic existence, and this is, another sign that the British Empire is dead and buried. And finally, the French Empire, it has also about 5% left of what it was at its peak. Um, and, French is no longer the universal diplomatic language. France relies on the US to address major global threats. Well, that's true. France, in fact, one of the goals of President Eisenhower was to destroy what was left of the French Empire, and so I guess he did that. But I think the French themselves destroyed their own empire. All you have to do is think of the fact that they had the territory in what is now the United States, what later they called the Louisiana Purchase, and they gave all that up for what? For what? For Haiti. Yes, they gave all that up because they had Haiti. Okay, that in a nutshell tells you everything you need to know about the French. So let's move on to another point of the meetings. President Zelensky, silent and suited. There he is, President Zelensky, and um, man, he was really silent, and he just wanted to look good in that suit and stay silent and smile. Um, and you know, but basically, I mean, was he coached? I imagine he was. They coached him endlessly to make sure that he didn't mess up another meeting. Um, and he totally missed this opportunity to take a leadership role, to organize the European leaders, to get them behind him, to get behind this plan, and to uh, make an ultimatum with the United States. No, they're just there to do the United States bidding. So that was pretty sad to see President Zelensky like that, but basically he seems to be at the end of his rope. um, and he wore this black suit, and he avoided all but he could have wore that at the first meeting and avoided all the drama, and he probably would have got President Trump on his side, and got much better results. And why he insisted on that, informal get up for the first White House meeting, somebody definitely wasn't giving him good advice. And finally, the biggest problem of President Zelensky, he doesn't seem to understand how to win over the American people to get more support, so that he can get more weapons and money. He seemed to have just completely disconnected from the American people, doesn't know how to handle or how to work with them. So, uh, the fifth point, um, the pointless, endless meetings, meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting. Um, we have, how many high level meetings have taken place. The NATO, the UN Security Council, the Coalition of the Willing, all these high level meetings. For the UN Security Council, we've had 86 formal meetings since 2014, just about Ukraine. The General Assembly in the United Nations have at least 11 emergency special session meetings. NATO heads of state, government level meetings, at least 12 summit level meetings touching on the Ukraine topic. And the Coalition of the Willing, we've had 6 meetings. Yep, they've talked about everything: boots on the ground, planes in the air, ships on the sea, and they're still having meetings and still talking about it. And finally, if you took all those meetings and you figured out that, the total amount of energy, um, transportation and money spent on those, uh, we could calculate about 500,000 hours of meetings, 100,000 flights, 120 million spent on these endless meetings, just getting together once in one, here and there, and photos, and we're going to do something. So obviously, these meetings that they're having are a total waste of time, and it seems that the uh, the Western powers, the NATO countries, the United States, have tried everything, and they're now tired. They're now giving up. So um, the final point: options to move towards a quick peace deal. The first one is the ceasefire proposal that was strongly pushed by Ukraine, the European powers, is completely been dumped, at least by President Trump. Um, it was mentioned during the White House meeting, and it annoyed President Trump. This was the Kellogg plan. President Trump brought in retired General Kellogg in November of um, 2024 to devise a plan so they could have a quick peace between Russia and Ukraine. And General Kellogg seemed to completely misunderstand the whole task, and he immediately took Ukraine's position and wanted to carry that tough guy um, language that he heard from President Trump. And his plan was basically rejected by President Trump at the Alaska meeting. And so he said, "We just need to get to a peace deal. We don't need a ceasefire." So, another point, for Russia, the fastest way to solve this conflict, obviously, is a total military victory. Some say that the Ukraine military has 3 to 6 months left between, you know, running out of soldiers, running out of weapons, running out of money. But of course, they've been pretty resourceful, and they're starting to replace soldiers with robots, and also making good use of their drone technology. But drones will never replace either soldiers or artillery, so they're just delaying the inevitable. For Ukraine, the fastest way to try to get to a peace deal is a compromise between Minsk II and the Istanbul agreements. Um, each day they will lose more territory. So, unfortunately for Ukraine, this is all going in the wrong direction. Um, Russia, all they have to do is just stick with their task on the battlefield. Another 3 to 6 months, some say, and Ukraine could be totally finished. For Ukraine, the idea would be to try to preserve as much territory as they could, to try to preserve the current government and constitution. But if they're not going to make any uh, compromises, then they're looking at a total loss. So, in summary, um, the Ukraine and Russia demands are, completely far apart, and they will never find a medium point between, or a median point between those two positions, between Russia and Ukraine. So no matter how much they talk through this, and no matter how much they say Russia has to give up this and the other side has to give up that, there's never going to be a point in the middle that where they can meet, because their demands are so far apart. So um, also, it's sad to see, but all these former empires that have lost their power and influence are trying to maintain some sort of relevance in the world stage. Hey, we're here, you know we're working, we got good ideas, and people better listen to us or we're going to get angry. And they're just dead empires that, just the kind of the smoldering embers of what's left of their empires seems to be, floating up and seems to, make some waves. But these empires are, the UK, France, Germany, uh, these are long gone, and they're never going to restore their power on the world stage until they industrialize and they start getting economic power, and that economic power can, help them to have more political power and sway. But anyway, um, Zelensky's, silent demeanor, that said it all. I mean, he just seems to be resigned to just do whatever President Trump says. But then as soon as he leaves the meeting, then he's back, territorial integrity and war crimes trials, and um, you know everything else that he's asking for. So, um, this really isn't going to get him from A to B. And but I think that the all these numerous high level meetings are just a waste of time, and they're not getting anywhere. And now they're saying, President Trump, he needs to put his foot down on Russia, and he needs to have, Russia call Zelensky, and they need to sit down, they need to figure it out on the phone. Well, no, Russia said, first we have the low level meetings, we figure out the details, and the leaders come when all the details are figured out, and they just sign the documents. This is Russia style. This is what they're going to do, and no one can force uh, President Putin to meet with President Zelensky unless there is already an agreement in place and they're just showing up to sign it. So this is another um, dead end that they're trying to push. And finally, really, the main path to peace right now is that either Russia wins or Ukraine says, uncle, and says, hey, let's just stop the conflict. You win, um, and let's try to, accept your conditions, because right now, Russia is already in the Dnieper region, so they will continue to move in that region. When they get through the Donetsk region, they'll get into the next region, and then it'll go from Crimea and 4 oblasts to, 8 oblasts. So if this isn't what they want to achieve, then they better start, making some compromises. So I think this is probably going to be, in the latter stages of the conflict when their military starts to collapse. But right now, they're still hanging in there, and so they're just going to continue on that path. So, anyway, make a long story short, um, there isn't any clear resolution at this time. But I know President Trump is pushing, but basically, nobody thinks that anything of any value will be achieved. Just more meetings, more talk, etc. Okay, well, that's the Rowell Report for today. I thank you for joining me and wish everyone a great day. Again, you can subscribe to my channel and leave comments below if you'd like to make a comment about the video. All positive, good comments are welcome. If you see something, you heard something that wasn't correct, yeah, point that out as well. I'd like to hear from you. So thank you again, and have a great day. Bye bye.